What do you see, or how do you see the role of art for raising awareness now that the earth is not sitting anymore?
I'm an engineer. but I think the role of art is bringing us together here is something that would have not been possible with necessarily scientific tools. The fact that we are in the same room, coming from different backgrounds, and I know some of you, and don't know most of you, but I can see from ambassadors of other countries here. We have colleagues from different parts of the UN and intergovernmental agencies here. We have human rights lawyers. We have a lot of artists in this room and people who are in academia and scientists. Coming here to speak about, I would say, justice. Environment is also a component to the justice that we are all after. And art is playing a role that scientists cannot, because it can communicate messages that scientists cannot. If we look at the media, if we look at the scientific literature, there is no shortage of bad stories and warnings and projections of failure and where the world is heading and why the earth is now sitting. But that's incomplete. Like that cannot drive action, and it cannot also bring all of us together, because we all have different stories. We have different trajectories. We come from this, you come from the same society and country, but your story is different from your childhood friend who grew up together with you in the same neighborhood. We all have different stories, and art can bring those stories out, can promote those stories out, can give us goosebumps about some of the things that we see and ignore and dismiss or don't think about. And that's the power that I would say art brings, and now connected to different things. We were talking to Moffat yesterday very briefly. And your initial, correct me if I'm wrong, but your initial motivation was not environmental. But I'm here because I heard about this person, this wonderful artist in Zimbabwe, very inspiring, very well known, who has been able to create a large group of other artists and talented people to tell stories, to fight consumerism, to fight inequity around the world, and to fight colonialism. So this is the power that art has. We say, yes, science is what unites us. Science helps us develop essentially common understanding or common sense of what is happening around us. But science on its own is paralyzed and incomplete. I think that's what art does, and it does it much better than all. Of course, as you said, being informed and learning can also make the artist more powerful. So empowering the artist is also something that science does, and the two groups hand in hand can hopefully help us fight a good fight to bring justice to this world.
Thank you so much. We're going to go to Laura now, and you have been working in this space between scientists and artists now for a while. As a well-known curator, I must say, in Zimbabwe, you did your project on art and ecology. So you have heard both sides. Many of the colleagues who were involved in your project are in the room now, from the scientist, Dr. Claire Griffiths, and many of the wonderful artists who have worked with you. What was your experience? How did the project come about? And what's your experience working with these two communities and bringing them together?
Thank you, Sogol. I think this project came about, I had an idea. I think the conversation around art environment and the climate change, I felt it was taking place at a very high level, way at the top. And I felt we must produce or do something to bring the conversation to the communities that are experiencing these or experiences around environmental issues, dumping of different materials from the consumerism sector. So I had a discussion with one of the scientists in the project, Sharon, just to say, you know, I want to do this project around art and environment. I'm working with 6 artists who are already using found objects as material, but I wanted to explore issues around the use of found objects by these various artists. Why is it that they were using found objects? What was the reason behind that? Can we talk about the environment when we look at their artwork? Because in all the time that I've been looking at their work, it was all about materiality, but not the narrative around the environment. So I wanted to explore this concept. That's how the project came about. I think I approached 12 artists on this project, and most of them said no, they were not interested, but we ended up with 6 artists who were interested in the project, and 3 scientists, including Sogol and Claire, so because I was also questioning a lot of things coming from materiality, questions around the environment itself, and questions around what is it that you see in a found object that brings you to talk about the environment. So we really wanted the scientist and the artist and myself to sit down, and we had an explorative workshop really that was based on the found objects and to discuss their relation to environmental issues and to question if we've got anything that we should call eco-critical art. Do we have anything that we call environmental art in Zimbabwe? So that was the conversation. And also we wanted to explore deeply into the material to see where does it come from, you know, the environmental side of things, the scientific side of things, to explore if you're using plastic, what is the history of that plastic? Because I believe plastic on its own has a voice. It came from somewhere, it has got a story to tell, and is it possible to tell this story through an exhibition? I think that was the critical question, to actually think about the intersections of art and ecology. And most of the artists are here using different materials, ranging from plastics, ranging from metal, fabric, you know, fabric that's coming from the farming communities. So we brought this project together, and it was quite amazing to see the scientific side, the data, you know, coming around the environment, you know, data about the oil spillages, and also data around the social impact of these things, and also data around information around other artists outside of Zimbabwe who are utilizing art as a tool to explore environmental issues. And I think the challenge that we had, that I could see, was the use of language between the scientists and the artist. And even me as a curator, I realized I used a different kind of language, but also to bring the artist to synthesize the data into a singular artwork that would also make sense, you know. And it was quite interesting to see the scientific group that I was working with move into the artistic narrative, but also the artists backtracking into the materials that they are using and how it contributes to the environmental narrative. And what we came out with was a different intersections of arts and ecology, from consumer, where these spaces and neighborhoods like Mbare are where the most dumping takes place, you know. And we also had heritage intersections coming into the conversations, the places for tradition, the place for heritage and our own ways of living, you know, coming into the space through the materials that we get from our fields, you know, and the fabrics coming from the tobacco farming, etc., and how it enhances this conversation and brings it really to a level where we are making materials that are recognized by the community, that they can connect with, and the narrative is not only scientific, but it is more emotional and more connected with the community.
Let me stop you here now because mentioning emotional, I think it's a good time to go back to the artist. It would be great, Moffat, if you could reflect on, first of all, how do you see the role of emotions? Sometimes we use emotions mostly as a negative thing, but how do you see the role of art in creating emotions or maybe reactions that could shift behavior, that could create impact more towards a more sustainable world, but also more just and more equitable?
Thank you. I guess with arts and making objects, it's all about emotions and provoking thoughts. Because all artworks, or rather all good artworks, are all about provoking thoughts and asking tough questions. But sometimes it also depends because of the geography. Like we are in Africa or we are in the global south. And when we talk of these key global issues, they usually come from the global north, and we're in the receiving end. So for me, being an artist working in Africa and working in Mbare, it's more about repositioning the center and more about creating knowledge in a different geography and making sure that we ask questions which are relevant to us, and we also use knowledges which are available to us.
Thank you so much. You mentioned provoking thoughts, and we'll go to the scientist, and that's his business. But how do you think actually this sort of global north, global south, consumerism or production in global north, or our value chains, production chains, play into this of what ends up in Africa and what's consumed in the global north?
The permission from the representative of the WTO. No, so the you know, if we have, this is a very fundamental question. Thank you for asking this. Our institutions around the world have been created to maximize production. Right? We measure the success of economies based on a very well-known criteria called GDP. To increase production, you have to encourage consumption. And if you increase consumption, then, of course, the environment would be affected. Now, we're asking the very same institutions that have created the world's environmental problems and injustice problems and so on to address the issue. It's like asking a dictator for a democratic process. It doesn't work. And this is what we have failed collectively to offer an alternative setting that can make us all better and you know, can take this addiction away from societies. And it's very hard. You remember the COVID time where we were worried about people's health and we're telling people to stay at home. And then the very same people that we were trying to save now could have been unemployed. And then we had to call them out and then they were dying. This cycle that kept repeating itself. Now, this is a major problem that we have when it comes to food, when it comes to other sorts of consumption. Let's take EV, for example. We in the global north, and many other parts of the world, we advocate for electric vehicles. Okay, what do? They help us reduce emissions within cities and pollution within cities, so their immediate benefit is that they can reduce air pollution in many places around the world, including some major cities in China, in Europe, and other places where we have had pollution. But there is also another element, and that is climate change, because we are very excited about EVs saying that it brings climate change, it addresses the problem of climate change. Okay, let's dig into that. if you look at the full supply chain, and I drive an electric vehicle, so I'm the first one blaming myself for that. So if you look at the full supply chain of EV, then you face some critical questions or some information that you want to hide maybe, or you don't want to know because they're really scary. When you look at what happens to the Africans and South Americans and Asians in the regions where we have extraction of critical minerals for the EV supply chain, and no one yet even talks about what we are going to do after and at the end of the lifetime of these vehicles. So that means that we're actively killing people in some parts of the world to save the next generations of the most privileged nations and societies. That's a problematic thing. Now take it to the food sector. Now 70% of the world's water is in the hands of the farmers around the world. Africa has had the responsibility, or the rest of the world is counting on Africa to feed the whole world in the future. Cheap labor, cheap resources, cheap products. If we want to bring justice back, we have to raise the price of food and reward and compensate Africa what they deserve. But guess what? If you do that, then there would be a chaos in the world because food cannot become expensive. So what happens is that the better economies, the advanced economies, invest their resources in producing industrial products, in selling services to those countries that are in their earlier stages of development and can afford investments in those sectors, and so they sell us in this part of the world very expensive stuff and buy the cheap resources from us. Not because in Europe you can't do agriculture. You can farm in Europe. There is water, there is good soil, and so on, because it's not worth it. And it's much easier to buy the food from the other parts of the world. This reality is something that we don't talk about. This reality is something that we are not interested in. And then the scientists, a lot of good scientists, sincere scientists of the world, also don't see. Because we keep talking about climate change and future generations, and people like us should remind them that if you are starving tonight, you're not going to think about 50 years from now. If your children are hungry, you cannot talk to them about the future. So that reality is what gets us, I would say, creates this bottleneck, because the global South countries are continuously asking for the transfer of knowledge, of investments, of technology, and then they say, yes, we are willing to change our development path, but we should be on equal foot. And I think that's what's missing in the world, and that's where a lot of double standards emerge and come out, and we see those when hypocrisy emerges, and then we don't have clear answers for these things because we don't think about the full supply chain. And in that supply chain, again, I want to highlight that art tells us stories that we can, and art, it comes in different forms, in different ways. And that diversity is what the world needs to know. That diversity is what we need to be reminded of on a daily basis. Children are dying in wars. There are people who are now exposed to the threat of a tsunami in different parts of the world. People who are getting flooded, suffering from drought, dying of hunger, and then people exposed to the pollution and many, many different things. And I think science fails to do that. I think science actually divides, and art is what can help us unite.
That's a very good point to go to Laura now. And as a curator, how can art challenge the systemic issues just mentioned by Kaveh? And how can you bridge so most of this kind of art, type of art that we're discussing today comes from grassroots narratives. How can we bridge the distance between the grassroots movement and the institutional spaces that actually house the traditional art?
Thank you for that. I think first and the most important thing is to actually think around reimagining the environment, reimagining waste through the artistic process. What is it that the artist can do? What is it that they can produce, you know? And as curators, what is our job in this curatorial framing where we are going to exhibit the work and also where we are going to create the narrative, the interpretations around that work. So at the end of the day, the challenge that we have as a curator, as myself, is to actually bring these scientific problems around the environment to a conversation that is understood through the artwork. So the material is very important. And also the artist role. Who are we putting forward? Am I putting myself as a curator in the front position? Am I putting the artist, or am I putting the material in the front of the conversation? That is the key thing. And as a curator, I wouldn't want to be in the front because I'm not the problem, you know? But I'd like to put the artist and the object as the center of the conversation. And now the challenge that we have between the art, the grassroots, and the institution is to think around public display of art. What is it that we need to do to ensure that the public engages with the artwork? So the challenge is not only to put the artwork on the walls of an exhibition, of an institution, but to actually bring communities into that space. And when I say communities, even the collectors that the artists are working with, because I see collection of all these discarded materials as resistant by a community. And they are collecting these from something that has been disregarded and bringing it into something that has a meaning, that has a story. So it's not only about putting the exhibition up or having the artists respond to what the institution wants to do. Can we turn it around? Can we respond as institutions to what the artists are doing? You know? So at the end of the day, the conversation doesn't have to take place in the institution. It takes place in the community and in the studio, in the dumping sites, where they are collecting all these things. And it can only happen when we turn around this curation framework and make it more what I call the community-centered curatorial approach. You know, it's no longer about the institution, it's about the community and the narratives. And in my own context, the themes rarely come from me. You know, I think the artists I've worked with can tell on that. I don't sit down and say the theme is environment. You know, we have to have a conversation and also reach a conversation that is equal between the institution and the artist. And I think it would dilute the powers and the imbalances that the institution holds at the end of the day.
Fantastic. That's a very good point, and I'm happy that Moffat is the next speaker now. How do you see the role of the community? You have transformed this community. You have also inspired a new generation of Zimbabwean artists. What kind of support did you get from the community? Or how do you think you're giving back to the community?
Thank you, but sometimes it can be also the other way around. We always feel that I'm here to teach the community, but I'm here also to learn from the community. Because most of the knowledges which we are looking for, they are in the community. And also to add on from what Laura was saying, I would think that we are lucky people in the Global South, in the contemporary art now, because of the shifts. I think in the Global North, you already have a lot of institutions, and there's institutional power, you know. But here, maybe our institutions are also failing us, either the academic institution or the museum itself. So it works that we can easily create a parallel system. We have all these artist-run initiatives like Mbare Art Space. It's possible, and it's easily possible in the Global South. And we have a lot of these places which are in the center of communities. So they become more powerful, more connected to the communities.
Thank you. Kaveh, what is your message that you would like to share with artists who want to engage more deeply with climate change challenges and water issues around the world?
I feel bad. Moffat is too honest. You give very short answers, like artists, abstract, and then scientists, like non-stop talking. Yeah. So ask him more questions. But I think, just connecting the answer to the previous answer, I think a lot of sincere scientists with good intention, with good intentions in the global north, unintentionally become part of a propaganda machine that dismisses some of the realities around the world. Because they have goodwill, they want to use a narrative to explain everything happening around us. So climate change becomes the explanation for every disaster around us, every drought around us, every unemployment issue around us, every hunger and so on, which is not true. If you look at what's happening and start dissecting things, then you see from one society to another, from one city to another, from one nation to another, reasons, root causes and everything will be different, consequences are different, and you cannot have one narrative that fits every story, every society. And I think that's what I want the artist community to do, inform us about those differences, inform the good people with good intentions about the diversity of the problems and stories of the world, and remind them that yes, you have to think globally, but at the end of the day, any solution that you develop must also serve local communities and different nations. And that is only possible if you understand. There is no way we can understand every story around the world, but that diversity helps us appreciate the differences, helps us appreciate the inequalities around the world, as well as opportunities for making changes, developing solutions, and so on. One solution might be a good fit for Canada, but not for Zimbabwe. And it's fine. We cannot prescribe a solution for the whole world where we are in different stages of development, with different economies, with different problems, with different resources. And that's what, how I like, and we work very closely with the artists. I think, Sogol, you've seen the mural we have actually drawn by a Canadian artist who came to our office. He was there for almost 3 months. And he was every day coming to the office, speaking to our researchers about the different problems they're working on. And at the end, we have this very large piece that has, like all of us can find ourselves in, but then there are some elements of it that where I have visitors, I have politicians coming to our office, scientists coming to our office. There's one element that where we were coming here yesterday, saw a lady carrying her child behind her, wrapped behind her. It reminded me of that strong element of that photo that shows the lady carrying water with one hand, holding a hand of her daughter, little daughter with another hand, carrying another baby behind her, and the little kid who can't carry the water buckle and water is dripping out. And when people come, I explain that story. That story cannot be told to many people who are, whenever they open the tap of water is running. They can never connect to that story. And we have a lot of publications about those problems around the world. But that single image there does is probably much more effective than the 30 years of many investments we have done in, because that's the life of our institute. Many of the things we have done are not as effective as they are in informing, for example, our people in our host country, Canada, about the problems that are happening around the world. And that's understandable because the types of problems are different. But that's something that art can do in a very abstract way that a lot of our publications can't.
Laura, how can we work together more collaboratively to bring the message across and be better storytellers, to shift the change Laura just mentioned?
Thank you. I think it's important to think around co-creation. How do we create together? How do we bring these scientific reflections that are maybe removed from communities that are experiencing environmental issues? So I think co-creation and co-design, and also to shift the scientific research into the artistic field. Is it possible to do that? To think about curatorial research within the context of scientific research around the environment, and what is the connection of that research and what would it look like, you know? Because I really think there's a separation where scientific research is going that way, and also artistic research around what to produce is going that way, and curatorial research is also going that way. But co-creation helps us, and co-design as well, of the projects that we could do. But also the second most important thing is to think about public engagement, you know? You can have a scientific paper around water and everything, but then how do you connect it to public-facing, you know, information or something that the community understands? So working with institutions like this institution, and we are very much gifted that we have artist-run spaces that are almost the catalyst. They're like the middle ground for the artists, and for myself even as an independent curator. But they're different from the streamline institution, you know, at the top. Because I believe these spaces are there to what do you call it, to stir the middle, you know? And also the idea of funding, alternative funding systems. It could be very difficult to fit within some frameworks, especially for artist institutions like artist-run spaces, and also for independent curation, where we do not fit within the models of other funding that support. So it will be good to rethink funding models around the environmental funds that are already running. How can we use those, you know? We are very privileged here in Zimbabwe, where you can have a conversation about something and institutions respond. You know, that's the other thing, to respond to what is happening within. You know. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I'm going to ask one more question from Moffat, then open it to the floor, so you can start thinking about your own questions. And before closing, well, I remember. Moffat, what would you like to see researchers do? What do you want from science? How can the scientific community help you in your work?
That's a tough question. Yeah, because there are a lot of things which I think scientists can do. One of them is, I know they follow almost clear academic ways of doing, but I wish if there's a way in which we can, especially in Africa, we can find a way we can go beyond colonial residue or the ways of doing in education in curriculum in Africa when it comes to science. It's very difficult, even when you want to think about agriculture. It is still a residue of colonialism that people still farm maize, and we still eat maize as our staple food, but maize is for stock feed, and it's not health for human consumption. But I don't know how we can tell scientists to move beyond that, or even politicians, because they still give data. I know in Zimbabwe they celebrate that with the bumper harvest of tobacco and maize, and we're a well-fed country, but you know that maize is not good, tobacco is not good for humans and the environment. It's quite complex.
Thank you. I'll probably come back to you on that if you want to reflect a little bit more. Do we have any questions from the audience, or is there someone in the audience that would like to reflect on how science can help artists?
First of all, I'm probably most prominent layman in this room. Don't know much about science. I do like art. So on that, I like that Moffat touched on that last part, the gap in knowledge sharing. So as a layperson, I don't know much about science, so it would be difficult to interpret data. Art, it's nice to look at, so you could look at it, smile, tell everyone about it, post it on Instagram, and then the next day, open a few bottles of water, throw them away and not recycle, right? So bridging that gap is probably difficult, but are there institutions, besides this event that we're having here, that knowledge sharing can take place between the artists and the scientists, so the layman can benefit? Is there anything being done in that respect, or is this a conversation that's just started? That's my question.
Thank you so much for the question. I think you're the best placed person to answer that.
I think when you talk about closing that gap, I think as a curator, that's the role that we must play, to connect the audience who are going to interact with these forms of scientific knowledge or the artwork, and to build the conversation around that. For example, the public engagement. We have an exhibition in Bulawayo, and what we did was to do a public artwork around the water crisis in Bulawayo, something that they experience every day. You know, it's something that they know, and we engaged the mayor, Senator Cotat, through the embassy, the Swiss embassy. They commissioned the artwork for that. So when we do that, something that is really public-facing, that involves all the stakeholders, the communities, the policymakers, and everybody involved, even the National Gallery of Zimbabwe. It is also something that's critical. So at the end of the day, the art has to respond to something that is relevant for a community, for them to engage. Even the artwork itself is made out of water pipes, water tapes, and the containers that we use to carry water. And one person mentioned that when they see the water tap at their house, there's no water. It's supposed to be a lifeline, you know. But now the water tap, because it's empty, it becomes a very restrictive thing for them to access water, you know. So at the end of the day, the emptiness that they experience when they see it in an art object, you're using everyday items that they see every day, that they use every day. So it becomes a language, it becomes something that they understand. Even a layman would understand, okay. And the comment was like, we didn't know that art could do this to us, you know, when we presented the artwork or when it was opened and unveiled. So that is one way.
Any other questions?
Hello. From the scientist, I got the feeling that what you're saying to us is that the systems as they are now cannot be changed by the people who've put the systems in because of the inequity. You talked about the electric vehicle, for instance, and all the challenges. And so people are being performative, perhaps, let's say, in the global north, in terms of what we're saying is environmentally friendly, without looking at the cradle-to-grave sort of situation for that particular material, whatever it is. My feeling is that from this, it's not really a question, it's a reflection, more or less, is that change cannot be evolutionary in this particular space, that it has to be quite revolutionary. Am I wrong or am I right?
So we have gradual changes, and we have transformation. So we are asking for transformation while our actions reflect, in the best case, gradual changes, right? What we are now talking about is I think we have to understand the incentive systems around the world and be realistic and fight for the right things. Tell me how many times you hear about stories about reducing consumerism versus how many times you hear stories about buying EV cars or install solar panels. We are not encouraged to cut back on consumption. Instead, we are just being encouraged to shift from one thing to another. And that results in increased consumption overall. Let's take the energy sector, for example. We keep hearing that we have installed more renewables here and there. What we're not told about is how much reduction in energy use we have had in different parts of the world, including the rich nations. The cleanest form of energy is the energy you don't use. When you bring a new 1 kilowatt hour extra to the grid, that would be consumed for a purpose. And so with all of these things, we are increasing consumerism. There is another thing here. The rich of the world are the ones who can change the situation and reduce the impact. But they are coming to the global south and they're telling them, you have to shift your development path. You have to transform their development path. And that's why we see the resistance. So even when it comes to gradual shift and changes, we have a lot of people with goodwill who want to make changes. We have a lot of young people, kids at school who come home and pressure their parents to buy EVs, to do this, to turn off the light, to do that. So we have people with goodwill, but they're also misinformed and disinformed. And then that's the thing, that's the diversity. And indeed, actually, yes, for transformation, I think that's where art can make a difference, because art has revolutionary messages. Art is disruptive. Art, reflects those emotions and many things. And art speaks in different languages with different people. You have free interpretation of the pieces of art, and I think that's why, yes, we need transformation, we need revolutions, and that's how we have made things better. And then we have to, anytime we hear something, we have to dissect, try to open it, understand what it means and what the implications are for the rest of the world. I argue that, it's very, very actually ironic and unethical if the obese of the world tell the poor, the thin, malnourished Africans about avoiding meat, where people dream about eating meat. You cannot tell people go vegetarian. Like people are like vegetarian already. People are not using cars already. People are like so that's problematic in the world. And that, yes, we need to push back. And I think one other thing that at least we tried at our institution, because a lot of us are originally from the global south, we say that instead of just being part of the propaganda machine, we have to challenge, we have to remind people here in a very constructive way and based on evidence and data that this story, there are other stories to think about and talk about. And those stories are the stories of our friends, our people from our homelands, the different societies around the world. And we do that with the people who have good intentions. And remind them that, no, this is not feasible. Indeed, if you do this, you're doing injustice to people. You want to help them do something about their water. You want to help them make sure they have, sustainable employment. You cannot, yes, environmental issues, environmental degradation causes a war. But it's also wars and conflicts that cause environmental degradation. Who's talking about birds in Gaza? Right? So that's the thing that we have to continuously remind each other of, and those realities. And that's the good work of people like you, who inspire, who tell story, who disrupt, who deliver a message that is different in a very, very peaceful way, without even talking, as Moffat is not talking, and I'm doing a lot of talking today. That's the big difference.
I actually want to go to Moffat now to reflect on this, because they talk about transformation, right? And you're one of the biggest transformers I know. You take garbage, you take waste, and you create the most beautiful art pieces. How do you think that could help transform inequality in our societies?
Okay. I think the first thing with art is it can draw people closer, and it can make the world listen. which is, I think, what you are also talking about. That the first thing is to make, to create an audience and make people listen to what we're saying. So art is both subtle and also provocative at the same time. So it's a medium which carries both elements.
How does that play into what you, I read an article that you had reflected about sort of injustice and colonialism on the continent, and how you think that there are certain objects that maybe were not even needed that end up here. And so how does that come into play when you have these objects and you collect them and go through the process of the cleaning and the creation and the transformation of the objects? How can we use that towards transforming minds and shifting behaviors of the public?
Okay, because what art does is just to pose questions. It doesn't necessarily give us or provide us with answers. Maybe I need to make that clear. So that's why you see we even struggle to, communicate sometimes, to talk, because we are meant to ask questions and to disrupt. So by asking us important questions, art makes us think about all these things which we are talking about. And also maybe speaking about my work, which traces the cycle of these things, these everyday objects which we use, and make us reflect on also post-colonial hangover, because when you talk of consumerism, it's all about accumulation, hoarding, and an appetite which we take from colonialism. Because if you look at most cultures in the global south, there are a lot of philosophies and ancestral knowledges on how to share, for example. So we can actually deal with big problems by just sharing and encouraging Ubuntu philosophy, for example, which speaks of caring for another. So when people share, it means people will not only end up throwing whatever they don't need in the bin, but they'll give the other person to use and things like that. I remember when I was talking at a certain platform in the US, I had to teach them how we even greet in Shona. That when you say Makadi, the other person responds by saying, I'm well if you are well. Tiripoka na Makadiyo. So there's so much caring, but the philosophy is not just about caring. It's about also checking on the next person if they need anything which we have or things like that. In certain languages you keep asking, how are the kids, how are the cattle, how are these, you keep asking because you are checking. You don't just want to be greedy and have things to yourself, you check on others. So all these mega world problems can be solved by very small acts which are hidden in our cultures.
Thank you so much for that. Any other questions before?
Yeah, thank you for giving me the opportunity. Right, so I was just thinking of an idea. You know how carbon credits work? You get incentives for sequencing carbon out of the atmosphere. How about if we have a system where artists who are using recyclable material, because you're literally solving a problem, waste is the problem, you actually get incentivized for taking waste and making it into art to make it a more lucrative space, like an art space. So I don't know if that system is already there, or if it's not, then I think we should probably consider making a system like that, just like the carbon credit system, and bring it into the art space.
I think both of you should comment on that.
think it would be a very good system, but it needs a holding capacity within an institution that believes in the process of creating the incentive, and also that believes that art and ecology, its intersections, it's something that the communities must be concerned about, you know. And as art institutions, unfortunately, we depend on funding to be able to create something that responds to that, you know. So at the end of the day, to go back again to my answer, where we're saying we're looking for alternative funding models that respond to the community needs, you know, that probably is not set within the boundaries of clear-cut boundaries that do not respond to to the idea of an artist wanting an incentive because they are using ecological materials, something like that. So it is really a collaborative effort between the artists themselves, the community of curators, the scientists, and probably the government itself, specifically here in Zimbabwe, where the government is far removed from the artistic production perspective. I don't know if Kaveh would like to.
So to use capital budgets towards art to raise awareness in the environmental space. Yeah, was that?
No, so just copying the same system of carbon credits, inventories, credits, carbon atmosphere. Artists, like in this case, we're literally taking waste from the environment, taking plastic, which is a problem. So copying that same system of carbon credits and just doing it in more of an arts space.
I think that's what you're doing already. I think, yes, so there are two ways to do it. Either say that there is, some funding at the end and someone interested in taking that pollution from you. Polluter fees have been introduced in certain systems, but they're very hard to implement. Again, those who pollute don't want those things to exist because they have to fund that. So it's kind of against their interest. But there is also another way, that you create an added value for something that was being seen as waste. And I think that's what you're doing. At the first place, an artist might pick something out of the nature just for the sake of the need of the material, not even thinking that it has an environmental benefit, but then that it creates an added value, a magnificent value for something that would have been perceived as waste. The issue is the scaling. How much you can scale this to make it meaningful. We are right now talking about being inspirational, and then create jobs for a certain group of people, and of course, bringing incremental values and then ability to fund other things and so on. But scaling up to the scale that it is meaningful for pollution reduction, I don't see it at this point in time. Maybe art can be part of a much bigger portfolio of actions and products or processes that can result in reduced pollution or a kind of a circular economy that we are talking about. But I don't think that would work realistically in short time.
Okay, because for me as an artist, it's difficult when we begin to talk of funding, because funding comes with its own agenda and it distorts even the agents of the artist because of its own restrictions. So sometimes for an artist we have our own drive and agency, and it creates also its own system of returns, because art is also not a charity case, so to say, because it creates its own, and its own returns in a way. Yeah.
Thank you for that. We're sadly coming to the end of this very interesting panel discussion. We talked about co-design and co-creation today. As an outcome of this discussion, we have a wall back there that we would like you to help us co-create and co-design together with the messages or inspirations you took away from this panel discussion. So please go to the wall before we break for the refreshments. But before we go to our closing speaker, do any of the panelists have any reflections, want to talk about the wall or anything burning you want to get out?
Don't be an artist.
Yeah, right. Maybe just to thank you for coming, and it's a pleasure for us at Mbare Art Space to engage in this important discourse, because we feel we are the center away from the center. It's important to have discussions in a place like Mbare, because sometimes mostly we are in the other side of town. Thanks. Thank you.
Likewise. Likewise, I want to thank you for coming and listening to us, contributing to this discussion with questions and so on. And please, write on that wall. That's the message we're going to keep. That's the message that would inspire my colleagues back in the UN and the United Nations University Institute for Water, Environment and Health. During the break, I will thank you individually, but to the great hosts and the wonderful hosting that you have done today, all the arrangements, a lot of things were last minute, the requests were made and you accommodated all. To our host government of Canada, who for nearly 30 years has kindly and first of all trusted us and has invested in using science and education for improving the quality of water, environment and health through the United Nations University Institute for Water, Environment and Health. We are thankful. They are the ones, Canada is essentially the sponsor of the main donor to our institute, and today we have the pleasure of co-hosting this event with the Canadian Embassy here. Ambassador, I'm very thankful to you, and Sogol, thank you so much for thinking about all of this and engaging with the community here. You are playing a major role here, not only as the messenger of the UN, but also as an informer of the UN, telling us about everything happening here and all the things that we should care about and know about, and provoking our thoughts and reminding us that the things and the realities of the world are very different from our ivory towers in the other part of the world. So thank you so much all. Please make sure you leave something for us on that wall that connects the issues of justice, art, environment, and so on, and all the things that you stand for. Thank you.
I'd like to say thank you to Sogol for coming up with the idea, and thank you to Mbare Art Space for hosting. And I think it's very important to have critical conversations, and thank you to all people who made this possible. And I'd like to say, for me, I really feel that something that I really believe has happened today, to bring the conversations from the top right to the bottom, to the grassroots actually. I think that is quite important, and also it has created a connection, between art and science, and also reflected probably on the problematics, of course, but also on the possibilities of a continued engagement, and also to think around what each of us represented here needs in the space for us to have maybe the outcomes that we are looking for. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much to our wonderful speakers and for playing along with me. Thank you, Moffat, for having us in your wonderful space. Thank you, Takadiwa, for arranging everything. Thank you to all of you for showing up. But special thanks goes to His Excellency Ambassador of Canada to Zimbabwe and Malawi, Canadian High Commissioner to Botswana, and Representative Jafarzadeh for being here with us today for closing remarks. So.
Thank you very much, dear Sogol, for this very overly generous introduction. I'm already the only one wearing a full suit and tie here. So, okay, we have our colleague from Switzerland. Thank you for that. So I thought I would sit to make my remarks feel a bit less formal. Good afternoon, bon après-midi, Dichone Njani. Maswera Makadi. Moffat was referring earlier to the importance of local language and vernacular. And I've been told by many people in Zimbabwe that I look like I speak Shona or Ndebele, or I look like I should speak Shona or Ndebele. So I try. And my tabasa, Nekundiko Zira. Distinguished guests, colleagues, partners, and friends, it's an honor to join you today to bring this rich discussion to a close. One of the benefits of speaking at an event like this is that protocols don't have to be excessively observed. And I see my friend Stefan from the Embassy of Switzerland and see other diplomats, artists, friends of artists. I can just say, good to see you. And that's enough, that's good enough. And secondly, many important things have been said by the panelists already, so I can talk about anything I want at this point, basically, so that's what I'll do. Then we said that the Embassy of Canada is proud to be a partner in today's event through our collaboration with the United Nations University Institute for Water, Environment and Health, UNU-INWEH for short. As Professor Madani has indicated, since 1996, so over almost 3 decades now, Canada has very proudly hosted UNU-INWEH in the city of Richmond Hill, Ontario, and we remain very committed to supporting the organization's mission to address the pressing challenges of water, environment, and health, especially in countries most vulnerable to climate and ecological threats, and that includes Zimbabwe. And in turn, I want to give you a shout out for being with us today all the way from Canada this week. It was a pleasure, Professor Madani, hosting you at the Canadian official residence earlier this week, and we had a very productive stock-taking and forward-looking discussion and collaboration, which I enjoy, and it's wonderful to have you here contribute to this vibrant exchange with all of us. This event and the panel we just saw has shown us how the power of art can break down silos, bridging science, storytelling, and social change. And the space in which we are, the art we're seeing here, exposes us to art that challenges consumerism, art that calls out injustice, and that opens new pathway for community-led action on sustainability. Art is successful when, in addition to looking really nice, it makes you feel something. Art is next level when it makes you feel, when it makes you see things in a different way, like the toothbrush you're using, like the metal and plastic you see around you, and you come here and you see it differently. And art that compels you to take action, like this amazing, spectacular culture piece that I saw in Moffat Studio earlier, that is made of old, used toothbrushes, um, computer keyboard pieces, and uh, really absolutely amazing. Congratulations on that. My protocol. And so I want to take a moment to recognize the extraordinary vision and leadership of Moffat Takadiwa, not only as an internationally acclaimed artist at this point, but as a community builder and a change maker through the Mbare Art Space. I have been invited to this space many times and was unable to come before today. And I'm grateful for Sogol's initiative to bring me here to get to see and experience this space. I have met Moffat and we've chatted, and also happy to be in the studio and to talk to the artists working with him. Moffat's efforts to nurture this creative ecosystem here in this neighborhood of all places is something very inspiring. And this space is rooted in history and brimming with possibility. We see it as a model for how heart can transform both minds and places. And somebody mentioned carbon credit type model to incentivize artists that are working with waste and recycling material. I think it's a creative idea that would help better remunerate artists working in that space. And if it works, we'll remember that we heard it here first in this space. And you know, it's not an idea that one institution can bring to life, but we can start talking about it, all of us, and see if there's a form that it can take to support artists, maybe in one particular country, not necessarily on a global level. To speak more directly to Canada-Zimbabwe relations, we're reminded today of the deep cultural connections between our two countries. One example is the Zimbabwean born curator, Tandazani Lakama. I don't know if anybody here knows her. So she's been recruited, and she's now working in Canada as the curator of Global Africa at Canada's Royal Ontario Museum in Toronto. At Tandazani's appointment by the one is the most visited museum in Canada, and it's also one of our most prominent cultural institutions. So her appointment speaks to the global relevance of Zimbabwe's artistic voice and to the importance of creating space for African narratives in Canada and also in international dialogue in general. I must say that Tandazani has become a friend. I was in Canada in the last month and I got an opportunity to catch up with her on her work. She's been there 6 months now. And so I heard her talk about her first experience of Canadian winter, which is something to see. And also she was there to see the celebration of Canada Day in person for the first time in the nation capital. So, and she's doing well. So I can report to you that we're taking care of her. And she's also doing spectacular work within the city. And it is equally amazing to see another strong and accomplished curator, Laura Ganda, is here with us and was just taking part in the panel. And she is here continuing that very powerful legacy of artistic leadership in Zimbabwe. We thank you, Laura. So I'm not going to be more. The conversation we just had with the panel aligns closely with Canada's vision and Canada's priority, particularly on our strong commitment to gender equality, women's empowerment, and support to most vulnerable people. And all of this lies at the heart of everything we do, from climate action to cultural diplomacy. We tried not to impose on artists. We did funding to espouse a particular ideology or point of view. But we also understand the constraints that sometimes artists experience working with foreign embassies in this space. And we think it's a good dialogue to continue having when we sign an agreement, what your expectations are, and how our expectations should also align with your work. So we're proud to support initiatives that amplify women voices, such as today's gathering. And as the Canadian Embassy, we were very happy to co-convene with UNU-INWEH and this event moderated by my friend and colleague, Sogol Jafarzadeh. We've had many collaborations in the past and we'll continue to have them, especially on water issues, which are a common concern for us and the UNU-INWEH. And I appreciate the critical insight, the creativity, the compassion, the great questions and contributions that came out of today's event. So I'll leave you with two reflections. The first one is, art is not only a mirror, it is a tool for transformation. Let's appreciate and use it as such. And also, collaboration is power. Across disciplines, countries, and communities, our shared work helps find unity of purpose, helps build resilience, justice, and hope. So on behalf of Canada, thank you for the opportunity to be part of this meaningful conversation and this wonderful event. We look forward to continuing this vibrant partnership for a long time. And please write on that wall to Shabonga, merci. Thank you.